On today's show, the Houston Rockets have a lot of potential options for their fifth starter alongside Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., and Alperen Sengun this next season. Who makes the most sense to be the fifth starter? What is the best way to maximize the potential of guys like Jalen Green, KPJ, and Alperen Sengun? How can we project how Jabari Smith Jr. will fit into this Rockets team? All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian, a credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Be sure to go search us up on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. Joining us now is a member of the HTX Chop Shop crew, Frank, who you can follow on Twitter, the Bird app at FTank58, a recurring member now, a recurring guest here over at Locked On Rockets. This is what, your third appearance here now, Frank?
Man, it might be my third or fourth. I'm going to start collecting royalties from you, Jackson, for coming on.
Hey, we might have to work something out, because what I have to, whenever I have you on the pod, I feel like we always have a great topic to discuss. The last time you were here, we were kind of debating whether or not KPJ and Jalen Green were effectively making each other better by playing alongside each other on the court, which was a fun topic, whether they should be staggered, not staggered, all that stuff, kind of one of the raging topics of debate amongst Rockets fans. And we have no shortage of fun topics to talk about here today, because right now, one of the number one topics amongst Rockets fans is who's going to be the fifth starter, right? We can easily pencil in the other four guys. It's super easy at this point. You got Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and Alperen Sengun. That's 4/5 of your starting lineup, guaranteed going to happen. But there's a lot of question marks about who that number 5 guy is going to be at the 3 spot. Could it be the veteran Eric Gordon? Is Steven Silas going to stay loyal and go with Jae'Sean Tate? Could he surprise everybody and go a completely different direction and roll with, I don't know, could he roll with Tari Eason, the rookie? Could he roll with KJ Martin? There's a lot going on there. So what we need to do is kind of lay the groundwork for the work that you've done, which I want to kind of know, what were you originally looking for? Because you put out some lineup data on social media, and that's what we're going to dive into, specifically in segment 2, kind of present some of the lineup data, present some of the numbers that you compiled already. But what were you looking for when you kind of started on this scavenger hunt, if you will, for who should be the fifth starter for the Rockets?
Right. So in the dead of the offseason, what I do with my spare time as a basketball junkie is I watch old Rockets games. And I've been going through kind of the tail end of the season with a lot of the young guys playing. And, it just got me curious. I'm looking at some of the lineups that we had out, man, and it was just, the spacing was horrible. And just like you pointed out, like, we already know almost guaranteed who some of these people are going to be that are going to start. We can say confidently 4 out of the 5, and then there was a debate on social media about who should be the fifth starter. And that kind of led me down that trail to see, what do these guys look like when they play with the set players, we assume, except for Jabari Smith in there. So I started looking at lineups that featured Sengun, Kevin Porter Jr., and Jalen Green, and just started mismatching them to see which ones yielded the best results. And to my surprise, I mean, it wasn't really a surprise, but, this is kind of common sense, but 2 guys that can't shoot shouldn't really play basketball together on a team that plays 5 out. So that's kind of how I got there.
And I wonder too, right now, as far as, at least in your opinion, right, what do you think as far as the lineups are concerned, or at least as far as like the starting lineups concerned, once we dive a little bit further into the numbers here in a moment, are you placing a bit more of a priority on the idea of having an identity that values that spacing offensively, or do you think the value should be placed more on maybe defensive versatility? Because I think those are kind of the two ways that the lineups can maybe go, or the two different identities that you can kind of have out of some of the guys available for that fifth starting spot in the Rockets lineup.
Yeah, I think we have to take into consideration Coach Silas and who he is and what his main philosophy is. His mark in the league is offense, right? So, and his thing is always pace and space. So I think just based on what his strengths are as a coach, he's always going to lean towards offense more than defense, as we've seen repeatedly over the season with Christian Wood and some of the other lineups that we had. So just looking at the team's construction, obviously there are lineups they could throw out that has more switchability, more defensive upside, but I can likely guarantee that it's going to be predicated on maybe not early on as the season, but I think when they reach their final form, it's going to be based on the offense and that 5-out philosophy that he really made his mark in the NBA on.
Now, I know that what we're going to get into is very speculative in nature, as it is at this point in the offseason, right? All we can do is sit here and hypothesize and speculate on what's going to happen moving forward. Right now, my gut is telling me that if Eric Gordon is here to start the season, he's going to be the starter alongside the other four guys that we mentioned previously. What do you who do you think is going to be the starter right now versus who would you like to see be the starter in that fifth spot? And then again, we'll dive into some of the backup data here in just a moment.
I'm going to say I think Eric Gordon, if you think about it, he provides everything, both offensively and defensively, to really maximize a lineup with Jalen Green, Kevin Porter. You add Jabari Smith there, another 3-and-D player with Alperen Sengun. Sengun has his limitations on both ends of the court, but he is by far not as bad as people try to make him out to be on either side. So EG makes the most sense to me because he's a shooter. He can guard pretty much. He's thick boy that he could get in the post and do his thing. If you guys remember when Harden and them were here. So I really think that that's a no-brainer there. But I'm going to say a but there because I think that, obviously we love to see our young guys play. We want to see some of these rookies and some of the guys that are under 24 get some burn in the starting lineup. I think in a dream world, you want to see Tari Eason in that role. But just for functionality, I think Eric Gordon gets the nod to start. Now, I do think towards the end of the year, kind of like how this year ended off, we'll start seeing some of those experimental lineups, and you get that Tari at the 3 in there, and I think that's probably going to be something that's special.
And if you could pick your choice, if Steven Silas gave you the coach's cap for a day and said, all right, you get to pick the starting lineup opening night, who are you picking to be the fifth guy?
Oh, man, that's a tough question. Okay, so if I want to win, I'm picking Eric Gordon, right? I'm a guy, I tend towards I want the team to be competitive. I know there's incentive for us to try to not be bad, but just not try our hardest to be the best. But I think Eric Gordon makes sense because he just does so many little things. And I think having a lot of confusion on the court that a rookie may kind of stunt the team's overall goals. And I think this season is very big for a lot of our players. And Eric Gordon, anytime he's on the court with Jalen and Kevin Porter, he just mellows things out. So just from a structure standpoint, I would still go Eric Gordon. I think it just makes sense. We need a veteran on the court, throughout the game.
If I could guarantee you Jae'Sean Tate would shoot 35%, just flat 35% from 3, does that change your answer? Yes or no?
No.
Oh,
no.
Well, okay. All right.
No,
all right.
I love Tate. I love Tate. I think his skill set can be used off the bench, though. He provides a lot of playmaking. He can isolate in the post. He's pretty okay in transition, a bit of tunnel vision sometimes. But the reason a lot of his strengths, even aside from the shooting, are things that the guys that are going to start for sure already do. Like playmaking, I don't need Tate playmaking. Posting up, I don't need Tate posting up. Really, all I need him out there is to play defense and shoot threes. And if I can get a guy that's a better shooter and taller, Why not? So I rather if it came down to between Tate and like Tari, in my world, I go with Tari because he's taller and a better athlete. So to me, that's just makes sense to me.
All right, well, we're going to kind of explore some of these different lineup permutations here in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your sports betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every single league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. They've got everything you could possibly need over at BetOnline. And right now, you can take a look at who the odds-on favorites are to win the 2023 NBA title. Right now, leading the way, the Boston Celtics at plus 400. You got the Milwaukee Bucks in second place at plus 625. The Golden State Warriors, not the favorite to repeat at plus 700. In fifth place, you got the Phoenix Suns at plus 950. And then much further down the list, you've got a bunch of teams not anywhere close to winning the title. Right now, the Sacramento Kings plus 10,000 to win the title. And actually in dead last, you got the Houston Rockets at plus 100,000 to win the title next season. So for all of that and more odds, head over to betonline.net today to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Continuing on here with Frank from HTX Chop Shop. And we're going to dive into some of this lineup data that Frank has thrown together, not specifically for us, but in general, covering the Houston Rockets. And Frank, kind of walk us through this first set of data that we've got here, kind of featuring the four most commonly used lineups by the Rockets last season.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, like I was saying earlier, I try to look at lineups that featured Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green, and Alperen Sengun. And the foremost featured lineups with the three of them in it. The top most featured one had possessions of them played together of 229. And that lineup had Jae'Sean Tate and Garrison Matthews in it. And that lineup, minus 7.8 was their net differential. Which isn't great. That's basically going to lose every game if you kept that up. The second most common lineup with those three in it featured Jae'Sean Tate again and Christian Wood, and that one was even worse. Now, this was surprising to me, but because I didn't think that Wood and Sengun playing together was that bad, but they do not mix. But a lot of times with these three non-shooter lineups that feature Tate, a big and Wood, most of the time Tate would be the odd man out that really causes a lot of the spacing and shooting issues that lead to those differentials. The third most frequent lineup featured the three that we're speaking of with Eric Gordon and KJ Martin. Now, this lineup was a plus 9.3 differential, so they were positive in 95 possessions played. And I think this lineup really sticks out to me because it gives you kind of a blueprint of what you want to see around these three young players. Eric Gordon provides that 3-and-D presence that's able to stretch the floor and guard on the perimeter and in the post if need be. Then you have Kenyon Martin Jr., a guy that's a cutter. He moves, he screens, he does all the little things, and he's a 35% three-point shooter. You put that around the athletes that KPJ and Jalen are, plus with the passing acumen of Sengun. To me, you get a positive team there, and the 95 possessions isn't a small thing. It's average NBA game has about 198 to 100 possessions, so that's about 2 games worth of data that you could see that they're actually doing this in. So that kind of led me to some of my thoughts on what the starting lineup to be. And the last most frequent lineup was the one that featured Jacob and KJ. And this one, they played 88 possessions together. And this was a net negative as well. Obviously, if you ever watch our 3-guard lineup play with Jacob, they're not really the most efficient or best shot selecting or best defensive rotation making. So whatever a young team would look like, this is that lineup for them. So I think that one is a couple years away from being viable.
And when I feel like it's just, you got to that last line, it was like, they're not the best at this or this or this. And it just kept going. And I was like, oh man. Yeah. I mean, that was just they need to fill out bodies for the rest of the rotation for the rest of the season type lineup. But I find this so interesting, Frank, because in my head, what I kept doing is I kept thinking, well, just from a 10,000 foot view, I'm like, all right, well, they played Garrison Matthews a lot last season. So if you just replace the minutes from Garrison Matthews, but what he provides effectively offensively, right, which is the spacing, the shooting, all of that. If you replace that with this, the similar level of spacing and shooting that Jabari projects to give you, at the NBA level, and then you also add in Jabari's defensive acumen, that sounds like a really interesting lineup, right? That sounds like a really effective lineup. And looking at these 4 lineups that you compile the data for, the one that has the plus net differential, the plus 9.3, so the lineup featuring the top 3 guys, obviously, in KPJ, Jalen, and Sengun, and then the 2 other rotation pieces in Eric Gordon and KJ Martin. I think that lineup is almost maybe the one that you look at where if you could replace KJ Martin in that lineup with Jabari Smith, like how much better does that lineup even become better than that 9.3 differential, which is already really impressive in and of its own.
Exactly. I think, and when you look at these lineups, like I think in a bubble or in a vacuum, if you think about Garrison Matthews' skill set, I mean, you would think he stretches the floor, but he's not a great defender. But really, the issue is not even Garrison Matthews to an extent; it's Tate and Sengun in combination. Because if you think what our team likes to do, especially with the starters, they like to run pick and rolls or screens and different things like that. And when they run those pick and rolls, and Sengun is the screener, a lot of times Tate being out on the wing, the other team does not respect him at all. So you get a lot of bodies in the paint, and like it just ruins kind of the advantages that our guards would be able to usually see when you're running a spread pick and roll with five out. So it's just conceptually with the type of offense that we run, it just doesn't work when Alperen and a non-shooter are on the court together. So I think, like you said, you replace Tate with Jabari, you run that pick and roll. Think of the pressure that you're putting on the defense when they have to come and maybe help out on the guy that's rolling, and you're going to leave Jabari Smith or Eric Gordon there in the corner or on the wing to be able to shoot a late contest on a 3. So I think that's really where I see the advantages of replacing that non-shooter.
And it's so tough for me because you look at everything that Jae'Sean Tate does provide to you when he's on the floor, and it's crazy because again, I threw you that question right at the end of segment 1, talking about if you could just magically give Jae'Sean Tate like not a flamethrower, but like 35% from 3 and guarantee that number held. I wonder just if that's enough, right? Because at some point, NBA defenses, and I feel like this it plays into scouting departments and whatnot. You build up kind of like a reputation, right, as like a non-shooter or as somebody that can be cheated off of defensively, that kind of thing. And we saw that happen a lot last season to the point where we saw opposing teams parking their bigs on Jae'Sean Tate and completely cheating off of him, screwing up all semblance of spacing, even when it wasn't a double big lineup on the floor, because you could effectively guard Christian Wood with a wing, because Wood wasn't going to punish a wing in the post, and then you could park the big on Jae'Sean Tate, which is what kind of led to that moment. Steven Silas had that exclusive interview with Adam Spillane of 610 Radio, talking about the fact that he likes the idea kind of, or well, maybe this is me extrapolating it a bit too much from that interview, but the idea, right, of pairing Sengun and Jae'Sean Tate together more often to prevent opposing teams from having that opportunity to park their big on Jae'Sean Tate, at least from a an offensive scheme standpoint, to kind of preserve some of that spacing. Does that play into, like, how do you think that plays into at least your perception of what they're trying to achieve next season with their lineups?
I think that, there's some creative ways that Steven Silas can use Tate. With a lot of cutting, that's one thing I really didn't see him do a lot in the starting lineup. And it's no fault to Tate himself. The starting lineup, they just didn't move the ball. It was a lot of isolation. The second team actually had more of a 5-out philosophy in how they played than the first team did. And, maybe it could work. But to me, at the end of the day, even if he did that, all Tate's movement does is just bring more bodies into the paint. I just don't, to me, if you can put, like, you replace that with Jabari, like, there's no comparison. Then you have the added benefit of when you could switch 4 and 5 or 3 through 5 with those 3 players. And one thing we saw from Tate this past season was that he was asked to guard a lot of bigs and a lot of bigger players this season because Christian Wood really wasn't up for the task a lot of the nights. And he ended up leading the NBA in fouls. And he took a hit on his defensive. He was known as a defensive player. That's really what he made his mark on. And this season was not his best showing in doing so. And maybe to no fault of his, maybe having to do a little too much. But, his limitations were definitely shown this season. So I just think that it's no knock on him individually. I think the pairing of him and Sengun is really what it is. And for me, I'm not going to prioritize him over Sengun. So if one of those guys has to go to the bench, I'm going to say it's going to be Tate.
Coming up, we're going to take a look at the most ideal lineups to maximize Jalen, KPJ, and Alperen Sengun. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And while you're on YouTube, be sure to search up HTX Chop Shop. Give them a subscription as well, where they're putting out a ton of amazing Houston sports content. Now, Frank, let's take a look at the lineups that you've got kind of dubbed as the ideal lineups to maximize Jalen, KPJ, and Sengun, because I think there are maybe some surprises on this list, namely the fact that when you pull this lineup list up for our non-YouTube viewers, Jae'Sean Tate does not exist on any of these top four lineups. Jae'Sean Tate has been completely removed from the picture, and I guess you could maybe kind of extrapolate and get to that, that final decision, that final idea based on those first two segments that we went through where it felt like nothing was going Jae'Sean Tate's way, right? It's an unfortunate case that shooting is such a desired skill in the NBA. And as far as spacing is concerned, I completely agree with you, Frank, in the sense that when you have Tate and Sengun on the floor together, in a hypothetical world where everything works perfectly, you could maybe get them to work together because they're such good passers and they have that court vision and they can maybe cut and play off of each other a little bit. But unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, and having two guys that cannot shoot the basketball on the floor together just has not boded well for this Houston Rockets team. So taking a look here, let's walk through your lineups 1 through 4, and we'll start with this very first lineup where we've got the first three guys, of course, KPJ, Jalen, and Sengun. And in this lineup, we went with Jabari Smith and Eric Gordon as the fifth guy, that was basically the lineup that we came away with in the top of the show, right? That's the predominantly favorable starting lineup to give everybody the best of both worlds: offense, defense, spacing, all of it.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the day one if everybody's healthy. That's the lineup we're going to see, and I think that's going to be a sneaky good lineup. I really think the Rockets, if we see a little bit of improvement from our younger guards and Jabari coming in, replacing, not that he's better than Tate as far as just the IQ and everything right now, but his natural skill set. We saw what he did in Summer League. You pair that with Sengun and Eric Gordon, I think you got a frisky lineup there. So that's why I ranked them number one. I think that's day one. I think that would be a pretty good lineup.
And the idea too is right. This Rockets team was so small last year, playing Jae'Sean Tate out of position at the 4. You had Christian Wood, who's not. Let's face it, Christian Wood's not a 5. Like, I'm so sorry.
Right.
Have fun up north in Dallas, but it's not going to go well for them if they trust him to run the 5 for any stretch of any game anywhere against any legitimate big man option. And the Rockets are just going to be a bigger team next season. Like, it's actually going to be such a breath of fresh air, right? To go from Christian Wood and Jae'Sean Tate as your 4 or 5 combo to go to the legitimate size and length and defensive versatility, at least in the case of Jabari Smith Jr. in Jabari and Al P as your 4 or 5 combo. So that in and of itself is going to, I think, make the Rockets a significantly better defensive team, being able to close out possessions. Because how many times did we see the Rockets have a strong defensive possession where everybody's locked in, they're actually playing quality defense, and then they fail to secure the defensive rebound just because they're too small, they're not physical enough, all of that. So that lineup kind of, I think, erases a lot of those deficits, a lot of those issues defensively. Now, there's a surprise here in this second lineup, so I'll let you walk the listeners through that one.
Yeah, so we got the 3 guys, of course, KPJ, Jalen, and Sengun. Then we got Jabari in there. Now I went with Tari, and the reason I'm going with Tari is because I feel like when him and Jabari are together, they form like Voltron, this like super defensive monster. And we saw, like, you saw what they did against Chet. I mean, they had Chet looking like, the guy at the LA Fitness that doesn't get picked up till to the old guys play. And like, to me, together, like, I don't want to see anybody else. If just for the fact that they're a duo defensively, I think having a front court that features two 6'10", 6'11" guys and Sengun and Bari, then um having Tari there as that just all around defender. I mean, look, we finally have a guy that could guard LeBron James for the entire tenure in the past, maybe over the past half decade. We haven't had a body type that you could throw on the LeBron James. You could throw on a Kawhi Leonard, those big predatory fours that the NBA features nowadays. And we got a couple of guys that we got in the draft. Maybe not this year, but in the next coming year. So I want to see what that looks like. So hopefully when they trade EG or retire him or whatever they do with him, this is what we're gonna see. But I'm not gonna hold my breath because I know who our coach is, and might be David Nawaba in there for all we know, but we'll see.
First off, I agree with you. I think it's great that the Rockets finally have a guy that they can throw at LeBron as he enters his sixth prime, because he's not going to retire until he's like 45 years old. So it's going to be very important that for the next 10 or so years that the Rockets have a guy who can check LeBron as he maybe starts to wind down at age 45 further down the line. No, but you're right. It's nice to have a wing, a forward, a guy who has the measurables, the physicals to really bring all of it to the table, right? The speed, the strength, the athleticism, and then you combine all that with the defensive IQ, the wingspan. Like, it is really crazy when you think about it, Frank. The Rockets haven't had a guy like that. The closest you maybe get is PJ Tucker, but PJ Tucker was 6'5". Like, he didn't have the length side, and he was also a bit older. I'm racking my brain. There really isn't a guy, right? We're not missing somebody, right? We're not completely like overthinking this.
We had the Trevor Ariza's and the PJ Tuckers and the Luke Mbamutes, but the thing with Tari, the IQ. Then he's able to, on the offensive end, he adds a dimension that he's able to kind of be able to make his own shot in transition or on the move or on the closeout. So I'm really excited about just the two of them paired together. I saw just rewatching some of those summer league tapes. There's just something there that I feel like the Rockets are going to be a top 10 defense in the next couple of years. And it's going to be on the back of those two guys. Just really shutting down a whole half of the court with what they do.
Yeah, we just did an episode with Ali Kambajani, our weekly, co-host, kind of breaking down Tari Eason. That was one of the areas that we highlighted was just his, transition play and what he's able to do offensively. He has, it would be a disservice to label Tari Eason as a 3-and-D wing because he is so much more than that already, and he hasn't even played a single actual minute of NBA basketball. So it's nice to have a guy who's not as one-dimensional as some of those guys that we rattled off there, the previous era of Houston Rockets, elite defenders, if you will, the Arizas, the Tuckers, the Mbamutes, guys who were... It's crazy. Isn't it crazy to think Luka Mbamute was the most versatile offensively of that group of guys, and that's why it was such a bummer that he wasn't available for that Golden State series. But I digress. That's a topic for our Locked on Rockets What If episodes further down the line. But all right, let's go to this fourth lineup here because I have a question, because visually our YouTube audience can see this, but in this fourth lineup, it features the three mainstay guys that we've, I'm going to stop repeating their names. And then fourth and fifth, you've got Jabari Smith Jr. and then the fifth guy in KJ Martin. But I noticed on the chart visually, you flipped it. Was there a reason that you flipped it and have Jabari, effectively in that 3 spot, or does it not matter? Was that just how you made it? It
was intentional. It was intentional because I think Jabari, he can downsize to play the 3 and upsize to play the 5. Obviously, I think he leans more towards upsizing to the 5. But the reason I put KJ in the 4 spot is because I think KJ's skill sets as a rim runner and some of the things he does on the weak side shot blocking has me kind of leaning towards putting him at the 4 rather than at the 3. I think Jabari is capable enough in our offense to really play that 3 role. He's not going to be able to give you some of the things that Eric Gordon would do as far as breaking guys off the dribble, but you would hope our 1 and 2 in KPJ and Jalen get the ability to read the defenses better. I would say one criticism I have of both of them as young guards is that they left a lot of points on the court by forcing a lot of shots at the rim that they could have kicked out to an open shooter. So if they can, if they took a step this summer in their growth and their IQ in the offensive side of the ball, Jabari can play the 3 on offense and the 5 out. It really doesn't matter. Honestly, it's just really their location on the court. But I think KJ's ability to screen, dive, weak side shot blocking, I would rather him be there to play that 4 role to kind of protect as well.
And our last lineup here, just Dacian Knicks stands, Dacian Knicks Nation in shambles here. I'll go in reverse order because you've got Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr., Kevin Porter Jr. at the 3, Jalen Green at the 2, and Ty Washington manning the point guard position. So completely jumping over Josh Christopher, dismissing Dacian Knicks, going with Ty Washington. I love it. I respect it. What was the thought process in this lineup?
I mean, this may be the archetype, maybe not with the specific player. This may be the archetype for the final form of this team, because I feel like everything screams that Kevin Porter Jr. should play more off ball. I mean, his skill set, and he could, the great thing about, once again, our offense that we run with the 5 out, it's really, the positions are just really it's just semantics. You know what I mean? Whether it's point guard, I mean, that really doesn't matter. Anybody could initiate. We see Eric Gordon play point guard. We've seen Jalen Green play point guard. Kevin Porter was the most dominant at point guard. But the reason I like Ty there is because, I watched Ty at Kentucky. I think Ty, he has the most natural ability to be able to generate some of those looks that you get when you run those sets and within the offense, and help other guys kind of get easier shots. And I would love to see what because I think Josh Christopher is redundant with Jalen Green and Kevin Porter, as far as he can get his own shot, but not really naturally somebody that can read the court. So Ty, he obviously breaking John Wall's record at Kentucky with 17 assists. I think he's a pick and roll maestro. He just needs to get comfortable in the NBA. I want to see that. We saw what Harden and CP3 did. When you put a dynamic offensive player next to a guy that can make the game easier for him, I want to see Ty be kind of, as he grows, I think that'll be a great lineup that we'll get to see with a traditional kind of a pace floor general with our, athletes out there. So I think that'll be something exciting. No offense to Knicks or Jacob. I think they're good, but just a little more intrigued with Ty.
Nope, shots have been fired towards Knicks and Jacob, as well as Jae'Sean Tate, who didn't make the cut for any of these lineups. No, I think it is an interesting argument to kind of think about, right? And this was an argument that we've seen kind of posited for like Alperen Sengun at times. Is second teams need a primary playmaker, right? They need a guy who can be kind of the central hub offensively at times for a second unit. And maybe that's where Jae'Sean Tate's role just is, right? Maybe the Rockets do effectively move him to the bench and he takes on more of a role, kind of commanding that second unit, kind of brings back some of the playmaking that made him more of a dynamic player in his rookie year that we saw kind of regress a little bit there in season 2, where he became, like you said early on, a little bit tunnel visioned at times, kind of focusing on getting his, I think, rather than trying to get everybody on the floor involved together in the offense, and maybe quarterbacking that second unit is exactly what he needs as kind of a challenge to, all right, I'm out here. Maybe I've got 1 or 2 of the starters with me on the floor still, but I'm able to take on more of a role here as like the 6th man coming off the bench to inject some life, bring that defensive edge off the bench, but also still kind of quarterback some things offensively. So it could be really interesting to see if that's the dynamic, the direction this Rockets team ultimately decides to go with him.
Yep, and I think with Tate, it's not really, none of this is a shot at him. If he ends up being a 6th man, then, good for him. He's in the NBA, and coming from a guy that had to, take a longer route to get to where he is to secure the contract he did. I think we see with Eric Gordon, there's no shame in that. And if he is the starter there we're missing, then good for us. I don't like condemning people to say, well, this guy's going to be a bench player for the rest of his life. Maybe he comes back with a 37% three-point shot. But one thing I know about the NBA is that the athletes, the guys that look the part, if they can play the part, are always going to get the nod, especially the guys that are drafted in the first round. So just looking at that, I think you're going to see Tari and some of these other guys get a lot of opportunities. And if they show that they can compete, then, that's just how the game goes. Sometimes you just got to just play your part. But I'm just excited about the season. I think we have a lot of options that we didn't have last year at a lot of these positions.
Optionality, that's a former Rockets buzzword. We're going to bring that one back, dust it off the shelf a little bit. But Frank, it's always a pleasure to be able to talk hoops with you. Do me a favor, let our listeners know where they can track you down at.
Yeah, I'm a content contributor at the HTX Chop Shop, and that's our YouTube channel. We just went over 1,000 subscribers, so thank you to all the Rockets community people that are able to get us there. We just try to, make content. We also do our pods and try to make videos. We have different things. Just check out the YouTube channel, subscribe, follow us on Twitter at HTX Chop Shop. And my handle you see there on the screen. If you're listening, it's at FTank58 on Twitter. As Jackson pointed out earlier, I post graphics, stats, make fun of different people, and just talk like a grown man. That's what I do. I'm not a stan, so I say what I want, and if you want to debate me, we could talk about it. But yeah,
always a pleasure to have you on the program, Frank. Thanks for stopping by.
Appreciate you, brother.
That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked on Rockets. As always, thank you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. We're also on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll also put links to Frank's Twitter as well as the HTX Chop Shop Twitter in the episode description. Be sure to give both of them a follow. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.